if there is something valuable inside you and you want to bring it out, let me give you an example. Carolyn Collum, you guys know her, I think, a little bit. So a few weeks ago, her daughter passed away, Jennifer. Okay, so what you have is almost a 70-year-old woman. How old is Carolyn? 70? Let's just say she's 75, just to be generous. Okay. So Carolyn is about 70, okay? And so she's had this daughter of hers for about 50 years, let's just say. First you have the part that involves motherhood. And in that you have hopes and dreams and disappointments and grief. And you have a great amount of attachment. Kids are troublesome, and you know that because you're experiencing that right now. Okay? Now, prior to the passing of Jennifer, what you have is a woman that you met when she was 50. Then she got to be 60. Then she got to be 70. Old age is not fun. It really, really isn't. Because what it does, it pushes you into your life and it forces you to see everything that you have done. We are not Rumi, we are not Shakespeare. We are really nobodies. You look at your life and it amounts to absolutely nothing. And it's a horrifying place to be. It really is. Now add to it, you have a daughter, okay, who has some physical issues. That's quite burdensome. And then she passes away. And now as a mother, you're grieving. Now, as a friend, you pick up the phone and you want to call Caroline to see how she's doing. A couple of things need to happen. First, Caroline must have wrestled with old age for a while to be able to talk about it, not emotionally, but intelligently. Because if it's just emotions, after a while it's just rambling on, and you just get bored. And then you say, I'm sorry, I don't really know what I'm talking about. You know? So you wrestle with old age for a while. It's emotional, then it becomes very rational. And what you have now, the marriage of lion and lamb. Okay, you have the emotions and you have the intelligence marrying. Now you have things to say about old age. And it could, most often if you're able to do that, it has a universal theme. Okay. Then if you're able to do that, you come to a place of acceptance. And if someone says to you, so how does it feel to be 70? There is this very mature part of you that understands and feels what it means to be 70. And you can talk about it. And if you're there, your audience will be captured. It's impossible not to. Okay? Now, sometimes you find your audience to be a bit immature. And you realize that they don't have the capacity to listen. Now what you have is a woman who's also lost a daughter. That's going to take some while, you know, to kind of just be processed so that the language is not overtaken by grief or emotions. And let's just say in about 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 years, Carolyn really comes to understand certain things. Now you pick up the phone and you say, so Carolyn, how are you doing? What you have is a Carolyn that has a solid human being on the inside that knows exactly how to talk about certain things. And when you have that person inside you, it demands paying attention to. That is what you have in Rumi. You have a man who is consumed by talking. You have a man who has been forced into becoming mute. You have a man who's pushed into solitary. You have a man who's been forced into falling in love with another man, then pushed into losing that man, going to yet another grief, okay, and then becoming a poet. You know, what you have is a diamond that has been in the belly of this like mountain for years, and this pressure inside has made this really, really fine gem. The problem with having that particular fellow, they don't say anything to anybody unless they can intuit that the person they're talking to is able to listen. You know, both men and women, but mostly women, they come to realize after a while that they just don't want to sleep with just anyone. You know, they go into a string of relationships, you know, and they slowly come to realize that, you know, they want someone who's mature emotionally, mature intellectually, mature physically. They have a job, maybe they have a tiny little house. They're homebodies, you know. And so they date this person for a few weeks, maybe a few months, maybe a few years, and then they lay together. And I think that's what you have with people like Rumi. People who have any type of maturity to them. It doesn't matter who they are. If you have maturity inside you, Cassie, you won't find very many people who are able to listen to you. So you wait, and you wait, and you wait. And if you happen to be creative, you're right. That's who you speak to. And no one and nothing can listen to you better than a piece of paper. You know, in a couple of lines, in the first book, first chapter really, آتش است این بانگنای و نیست باد, that you have to breathe, push air into this bamboo stick for some sound to come out. And Rumi says, you know, it would be a grave mistake for you to think that as I am breathing into the stick, that it's just air. You know, it has the immaturity of a 23-year-old man up to the age 37 who just talked uselessly to a ridiculous audience. There is in this breath the story of a 37-year-old man who meets a 60-year-old and falls in love. There is also the story of a 38-year-old who loses his teacher. There is also the story of writing almost 1,000 poems dedicated to this man, and he never came back. He just abandoned me. but I praise him nevertheless. It's very difficult to be able to read the Masnavi and with all those components, being aware of them. What was that saying of Soren Kierkegaard? Those who can't be silent can't speak. If you can't contain your thoughts and emotions for a while, like 10, 15 years, you probably haven't understood anything. Because it really takes time to be able to process your own experiences. It doesn't matter what your experiences are. And I think to process any experience the right way, you have to be a monk, or you have to be a nun. You have to find this dark, quiet place where you just go every day and you try to kind of figure out what that'll happen to you. And then you begin to kind of wrestle with all the things inside you. And then, but for that to happen, you have to kind of become very, very quiet. And then you understand. But because you're fresh in understanding, you want to go out there and scream, assuming that everyone is going to enjoy what you have discovered. And then it takes some time to realize, well, you have wasted a lot of time talking to useless people. And hopefully you haven't become addicted to just talking. And it's like Warren Buffett, for example, who is a billionaire, and imagine he doesn't find anyone worthy of his money. He just goes to the bank and cashes everything out and throws them into the river. You come to a place where for the first time you really understand your own experiences and you understand its value. And you also realize that very much like a man or a woman who just lays with anyone, you have given your experience to just everybody. And then you say, you know what? I'm not going to do that anymore. And that takes a lot of courage. It's not really courage, just kind of move into a different stage of maturity. And then you wait, and you wait, and you wait, and you wait until you find someone. In case of Rumi and Shakespeare and lots of other, poets, you realize that perhaps it's best to just write. There is another thing about writing, Cassie. The paper is always in a state of submission. The paper loves you, never complains. It's very, very rare to find a human being who submits. When you read Daughter of Fire, by Sahib, he becomes very agitated quite often when Irina just doesn't listen well. And it's not just listening Because when someone like Bhai Sahib talks, he wants to see the fruit of his speech. And that's the student's action. And he keeps telling her, why don't you love more? Why don't you listen more? Why don't you adopt my culture more? You white Westerners, you're always the same, So there's a good amount of disappointment, So and that's, I think, a quality that you need to have if you want to listen, that you have to be in a state of surrender. But you can't submit and surrender yourself to people that you don't respect. And you can't respect people you don't know. And you can't know them if you don't love them. And to love someone takes a long, long, long time. And this particular love that, for example, Irina has for Bhai Sahib, or Rumi has for Shams, it's frightening. It's frightening because it's kind of like the paper clip being forced by the magnet, just gets pulled closer and closer and closer. But the paper clip goes to the magnet with a good amount of independence and history and assumptions about this and that. And so every time the paper clip gets closer to the magnet, it becomes less of a paper clip, less independent, less free, and it also has to leave the community of paper clips. It's not fun. So when someone like Rumi says, listen, well, who is he talking to? I'm not really quite sure if anyone can really surrender themselves to him. First, you're talking about a book. Second, the problem with surrender is that you can't be focused on anything else except him. You can't be selective in what you want to. What happens is you hear words, then you listen because something about the words has gone inside you. When you listen, then you begin to hear. The second hearing is very different from the first hearing. I remember when I had gone to Hussein's shop. Shahram Nazari had just come out with an album. I forget I think it was Yadgar Doost, Remembering the Friend. And I had memorized maybe the first 20, 30 minutes. And it was a time where my vocal cords, they had opened up. I could do the tahreers really, really nicely. And so I went to Hussein's shop. And Hussein said, so have you practiced singing? I said, yeah. He says, okay, well, show it to me. Next to him was a pizza shop. He said, just don't scream, okay? I said, okay, Hussein. So, and I couldn't. I the volume went up. And Hussein got a little teary-eyed. And then he just stared at me. And I looked away after having finished singing for him. And then at a certain point he looks at me and says, I was praying. I said, oh, okay. He says, do you want to know what I was praying for? I said, yeah, I'm a kid, what do I say? He says, sure, tell me. And he says, I was hoping that you would become interested in the things I am interested in. Because I was going the direction of traditional music, But without the music being anchored on the stuff I'm interested in now. But at the age of 19 and a half, 20, it was very, very difficult for me to listen to what he was actually talking about. It was nice for me to hear, but because I couldn't listen well, and because I couldn't hear well, it just became a bumper sticker for me, and something I remember now after like 30 years. If there is any wisdom inside you, and you want that wisdom to be listened to, it wouldn't be a bad idea, even though I know you've done this and you're much better at this than I am. Read the 4 Gospels. What you have is the Gospel of Mark. He talks. Nobody's able to listen. So he keeps getting misunderstood. Then you have the Gospel of Matthew. He assumes that just because he's a Jew and he's around Jews, that Jews are able to listen and understand Jews. Nobody does. Then in the Gospel of Luke, he says, well, forget my own people. They're idiots. Let me just talk to anyone who's able to listen. Nobody is. And you know what happened in the Gospel of John? He doesn't tell stories to anybody. He doesn't talk. He knows that nobody really has the capacity to listen to the refined aspects of life. Nobody can. So he just becomes a magician, And then you have a really, really kind of depressing, the Gospel of Judas. He doesn't want to talk. He doesn't want to do magic tricks. He just wants to die. So next time you find yourself in the classroom and you ask your students, are you guys listening to me? And you have 40 people, nodding, yes, professor, you're listening. You should know that they really aren't. You may be able to inspire them, entertain them, even have them like you. I'll say one last thing, which is really, really, really depressing, Cassie. Whether you want to or not, life is such that you will always, before you die, you will have something profoundly valuable to share. Whether it's been a life that's been wasted, whether you want to spend more time with your child, your parents, you should have gone into art instead of academia. In other words, you will always leave this world with a good amount of wisdom inside you just before you go. Because no one is able to listen to that, you'll always be alone in life. If there is anything of value inside you, it will never be heard. It's impossible. And if you can know that, you won't marry so that he could understand you or you could understand him. You won't have kids so that they could understand you or vice versa. You won't go out with your friends so that you could talk about, profound things in life. You will always take that aloneness and you will try not to share as much as possible because you've understood a few things. Rumi was very lucky. He had a lot of information before meeting Shams. He had a good amount of letter of law inside him. Shams made all of those things come to life. Most of us, we just have a lot of information, but there is no life to them. All the audio lectures that I have, and these are professors who are at Yale and Princeton and Harvard and all these places. We must have about maybe, I don't know, a few thousand hours of these people. They are really quite bad.